What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and football season is here. We had the Hall of Fame game last night. It's officially August, which means over these next few weeks, you're going to be drafting in your home leagues against your friends, family, coworkers, and I want to make sure you guys are in the best possible position to win those leagues, because that is why you play the game. To win the league, to get bragging rights, to beat our friends, to get the home league prize money up top. So today, we are going to talk draft strategy. Pretty much the entire idea behind this video is that if you could only watch one video before your home league draft, I want it to be this one. We're going to go over the entirety of how I'm attacking home league drafts in 2024. We're going to go position by position and then do a mock draft at the end. So if you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
VVS stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen.
Now, if you've seen my videos in the past, specifically draft strategy videos, this screenshot is going to be very familiar. It is "Don't Draft an Early Round RB Without Legendary Upside." It is the title of an article written by Pat Kerrane back in 2021. And to me, it's one of the best articles in all of fantasy football over the last decade. It is that good. But the issue is, it's a little bit outdated, right? This was written in 2021. Draft prices have changed since then. And then also it uses playoff advancement rates, which are a little bit flawed. The idea is that in a given year, a certain amount of teams make the playoffs. What percentage of teams make the playoffs with this player? Well, the issue is that a guy like Chris Olave last year, his data was skewed, where his advancement rate was actually okay, but it was only pumped up due to the fact that Christian McCaffrey was drafted in the first round, a lot of times in combination with Chris Olave back around in the middle of the second round, inflating those numbers. So I think we can do better. And the metric I want to use instead of playoff advancement rate for our 2024 fantasy football draft strategy videos, not just this one, but just all the ones we're going to do this month, I wanted to use wins above replacement. Now, shout out to Destination Devy. They are a dynasty fantasy football Devy-focused website, but they do have a really cool tool called the War Machine, where it uses wins above replacement based on the settings in your league to pump out wins above replacement for your fantasy league. Now, shout out to Jordan Backus, shout out to Destination Devy. Pretty much what wins above replacement is, as defined by Jordan Backus when he was making this tool, is as follows. WAR stands for wins above replacement, and it is a great one-measure statistic to capture the true value of a player. At the 1 week measurement level, WAR shows the win probability increase or decrease of a given player over a replacement level player. There are many calculations needed to achieve a player's WAR. Don't worry, we'll get into that in a second, but this single metric will show you how valuable a given player is over the replacement player at his position over a period of time. And the idea is here, with wins above replacement, is that it puts all positions on an equal playing field. Because if we just use points per game, then you would have Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen in the first round of your fantasy leagues. But because we know positional value and the fact that you can stream quarterbacks later, we draft them in the third round or late second. So wins above replacement puts everybody on an equal playing field. Now, before we even get into wins above replacement, we have to know the league settings we're going to use for this video. And I put out a poll of what is the most popular format league settings that you guys use, and 37% of 1.8 thousand of you put one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, one tight end, two flex, full PPR as your most used format. Now, I will say, do not worry. Wins above replacement doesn't vary a ton from league to league, as long as they're all in that similar area of, can you start, 3 to 4 wide receivers and then like half to full PPR is all under the same umbrella. But when we use this format, we get the top 20 players in WAR from last year. And I'm only showing you this just to get acquainted with WAR and then also see if it passes the sniff test. And to me, it does, right? The top 20 players from last year looks about right. McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You have Josh Allen up there, DJ Moore, ETN, Jalen Hurts, Laporta, Breece Hall, Rashad White, Raheem Mostert. Pretty much the top 20 players from last year. Again, not using price, right? That's with the playoff advancement rates. WAR is just isolating this player in a given year. Now, we can also look at the top 36 players from last year in ADP and just kind of get a overall feel for how the first 3 rounds played out as it pertains to WAR. Now, I will say, I capped off players at -2 wins above replacement because when you miss games, it can get wonky and you can get like -4 wins above replacement, and it's a little bit skewed just from lack of amount of games or just a weird sample size. So that's why you could see Nick Chubb at -2, but to me, it passes the sniff test, right? Jefferson was a bad pick, Kupp was a bad pick, Eckler was a bust, Garrett Wilson not great, Bijan not great, Waddle wasn't great, Saquon wasn't great. The guys who were big hits though, McCaffrey, Tyreek, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. So to me, that looks about right. And that was just to get you acquainted with what wins above replacement looks like in a given year. So now let's apply this to 2024. The issue is, in the past, I have said, well, historically speaking, round 3 RBs produce this way. Well, the issue is that now running backs are going as late as ever. So running backs are going in round 3 in 2021 are now going in round 5 in 2024, which is a big issue. So we can't just broadly assume draft rounds. So I actually went and I looked on Underdog over the last 4 years. We have seen this trend. 17 running backs drafted inside of the first 3 rounds in 2021, then 15 the following year, 12 the next year, and then 9 in 2024. And we actually see this trend happening in your home leagues, where if we look on ESPN, Sleeper, and Yahoo, there are about 12 to 14 running backs going inside of the top 3 rounds on average, which would be somewhere between 2023 and 2022 in Underdog terms, which, if you remember the last 2 years when I've used Best Ball data or used Underdog, you guys have said in the comments, Ron, it doesn't apply to my home league because it's way more wide receiver hungry. Well, now your home league is starting to look more and more like an Underdog draft. So to adjust for that, I want to use positional ADP instead of just broad round by round ADP. So what I did is I went to your 2 highest drafted platforms, Sleeper and ESPN, to find where running backs are getting drafted on average by round as it pertains to positional ADP. So I went to ESPN and Sleeper. I found that roughly RBs 1 through 4 on ESPN and Sleeper are getting drafted in the first round, and then so on. But I expanded it and made sure to keep it broad, right? Where round 2, you can see RBs 5 through 10 on ESPN, but RBs 5 through 9 on Sleeper. Well, we just kept it at RBs 5 through 10. So just the lowest and the highest from both of the 2 sites, just to get a broad range. Now, there is some overlap, but that is fine in my eyes because you're not going to have exactly 4 running backs drafted in the first round and then exactly 5 running backs drafted the next across every single league. So this is just a way of keeping it broad, and I made sure to keep at least 6 running backs in each of these round by round ranges because we have 5 years of data here that we're going to be using since 2019. So 6 times 5 is 30. We would like to have a sample size of 30. That's where we're getting to kind of the nerdy stuff of statistics, but a sample size of 30 is usually pretty dang good. And what that gives us is the average wins above replacement in this new environment round by round with these running backs, right? So now we know RBs 1 through 6 have an average wins above replacement of 1.69, which is the first round of your 2024 leagues, and then so on and so forth. Now, before we go further with our running back strategy, we want to see if the idea of legendary running back upside still applies in 2024. This is the idea that early round running backs bust at a higher rate than wide receivers. So if you're going to take on that risk, you need to shoot for the moon that wide receivers can't match. Is that still true in this new environment? So what I did this exact same thing for wide receivers, and then I found the average wins above replacement across each round. Round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, and then we found our bust threshold just to see how often are each of these positions busting early. And we set the threshold at 65% because, I don't know, in grade school, anything under a 65 is a failing grade. To me, I think that that's a fine cutoff for bust rate. It's a little bit arbitrary, but I think it works for our research here. And what that gives us is, in this new environment, right, so you can see round 1 is positional ADP of RB 1 through 6 over the last 5 years, wide receiver 1 through 8 over the last 5 years. Now, of course, again, 8 plus 6 isn't going to equal 12 exactly, but that is just give or take 1 to 6 running backs in the first round, give or take 1 to 8 wide receivers in the first round. And what that gives us is historical bust rates since 2019 in this new environment where running backs are getting priced lower than ever and wide receivers priced higher than ever. And we can see the trends still hold true that running backs are busting at a higher clip. On average, in the first 4 rounds, running backs are busting 40% of the time to wide receivers 30% of the time. That is a 25% increase over wide receivers in terms of busting early. Now, I will say, I did break it down round by round. First round, still a pretty big discrepancy there, but second and third round, your running backs and wide receivers really close in on each other, with round 4 being where there's the biggest discrepancy between wide receiver and running back, even in this new environment. And then when we look at injuries as well, we can see running backs in the top 24 ADP, so positional ADP, top 24 running backs, top 24 wide receivers. They are also still getting hurt at a higher clip than wide receivers. So we know running backs are busting about 25% of the time more often in the first 4 rounds than wide receivers. And then they are also getting hurt about 35% of the time more often than wide receivers in the first 4 rounds. So the question now becomes, why draft one early? And this is why you draft a running back early, even knowing the risk. First of all, when we just look at average wins above replacement round by round, wide receiver and running backs are about even, with actually round 2 and 3 being an advantage towards running backs, rounds 1 being an advantage towards wide receivers, and then round 4 is where that discrepancy really gets big, where wide receivers outshoot running backs. First of all, I would say it's positional value, because we can see by round 4, wide receivers are outproducing the running backs, which means you can get your wide receivers later. On top of that, the idea here with legendary running backs is that running backs have an upside that wide receivers simply cannot match. And that is shown here when we look at the wins above replacement from last year. You can see McCaffrey is the only player in all of fantasy, even despite, right, after McCaffrey, it's wide receiver, it's like 6 wide receivers after McCaffrey. McCaffrey was the only player to hit 5 or more wins above replacement last year. He was an advantage that no other player could replicate, and that is what you're shooting for when you take on this risk of an early round running back. It is the idea that you want to find the next running back that has 5 or more wins above replacement. And when we look back all the way to 2010, there have been 12 total 5+ wins above replacement seasons. This isn't a great definition for a legendary season, but to me, it still illustrates what we're looking at here. Just 1 wide receiver to 11 running backs, and we are really good at spotting the legendary running backs, because you can see I found their positional ADP in each year, right? We have McCaffrey 3 times, you have Gurley 2 times, you have guys like David Johnson, Adrian Peterson, a bunch of fantasy studs, but they were all drafted early. I believe that's 9 of the 11 of those running backs were drafted inside of the top 12 running backs, and half of them were drafted inside of the top 6 running backs. So we know who is going to be that crazy difference maker. They're drafted early. So if you're drafting a running back early in the first 3 rounds, he needs to have the upside to be on this list when we look at this next year. And this even holds true when we just look at this broadly, round by round. I found the best wins above replacement season by round since 2019. You can see here, running backs beat out wide receivers every round until round 4. Now, let's move on to the middle rounds. I think the biggest question of this offseason has been, with running backs getting priced down, is the RB dead zone still a thing? And I would say that it is, because when we look at the average wins above replacement by round, and again, in this new environment, right? So it's RB 1 through 6, and then wide receivers 1 through 8, we still see that wide receivers are beating out running backs, especially in that round 4, 5, and 6 area. And that to me is where I would have the dead zone, because I took the average wins above replacement of each position. We then found the plus minus, or just the difference. And you can see the biggest difference in discrepancy between each position came in round 4, 5, and 6. That is where wide receiver has the biggest edge. And this is the range of RB 13 through 24 in this new environment. And these are the running backs that fit that bill since 2019. It's pretty much a graveyard. Doesn't matter if you're young or old. It's a lot of injuries and projected volume, but it's like Kerryon Johnson in 19, Dobbins twice, Cam Akers is on here. Breece Hall actually wasn't that great as a rookie because he got hurt. You have Miles Sanders last year who was brutal. It's just an absolute graveyard. And when we apply that forward to this season, you have Rachaad White through Zamir White. Now, I will say, I have not made a video yet on the dead zone. We will talk about that eventually, where I talk about my clear fades in the dead zone, the guys that I'm fine targeting there. Look, only sits deal in absolutes. I am not saying you cannot draft a running back in this range, but you should probably avoid it if you can, because this is going to be a range where your league mates are drafting these running backs, and you can get value elsewhere. The data pretty much tells us that while your league mates are running to fill their RB2 spots with these players, you can find better wins above replacement and more value to your team elsewhere, and you can fill those spots later on. They're just paying up to know who's going to be in their running back 2 spot, whereas you can find plenty of value off of waivers. Just last year, we saw Kyron Williams, Jerome Ford, Devon Achane, Zach Moss, Gus Edwards, Zeke Elliott all come off of waivers and win leagues for people last season. So, in total, when we talk about our running back draft strategy in 2024, we want to avoid the RB dead zone in rounds 4 through 6. We want to prioritize upside at running back if we draft them in those early rounds 1 through 3. And I will link it somewhere here. I just did a video the other day talking through who I think could be that legendary running back in this given season. I laid out 5 candidates. So if you want to know, hey, okay, we're going to draft running backs early who are going to finish RB1 overall, well, who are they? That's the video for you. And then we also know that rounds 7 through 10, when we look back at this data here, that is where running backs start to get not only an edge on the receivers, but things start to flatten out, and you can get your league-winning running backs late. That's where you got Rachaad White last year. The year before that, you got guys like Ramondre Stevenson and Tony Pollard. A lot of really, really good running backs can be found in that area. Now, moving on to our wide receiver strategy here, it's pretty much defined by winning the flex. It is a heuristic, I guess you could say, made by RotoViz way back in like 2013, 2014. And I think it still holds true today. It's the idea that we want to race to fill our flex spot and fill it with wide receivers and get an edge over our opponents. Now, the reason that we are filling with wide receivers is because usually wide receiver is the optimal position to go in your flex spot. And the beauty of this is that using Destination Devy's wins above replacement tool, they actually also have an algorithm that finds the optimal amount of wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends that should be in your flex spot across the entire league. So in this format with 12 teams and 2 flex spots with 24 flex spots total across the entire league, the wins above replacement tool found that in an optimal world, a perfect world, 18 of the 24 flex spots in this league are occupied by wide receivers, meaning 75% of the time, your flex should be a wide receiver, and we want to optimize for that. We want to make sure that we are racing to get the optimal position in our flex spot and putting a wide receiver there. This is actually a really great, I guess you could call it, passage, caption, excerpt, whatever you want to call it, from RotoViz back in 2013. Shout out to Sean Siegel. To me, he's one of the greatest fantasy analysts out there. He was way ahead of his time calling this kind of stuff in 2013. He said, you have to dominate the flex. When reading about the flex, you usually hear it referred to in the context of, oh, he's a low-end RB2 or flex, referring to guys who aren't any good as flex players is a kind of shorthand. Few writers are suggesting you intentionally start a weaker player in your flex position. It can have the effect, however, of de-emphasizing a starting spot that counts as much as any other lineup position. It can contaminate your strategy. In fact, the flex position is arguably the most important position in fantasy because it's one of the easiest positions to generate more value over average than your opponents. Whatever strategy fits your particular league format, that strategy should be based on putting an elite player in the flex position. So he's saying a lot of the times people kind of discard the flex. Oh, well, I'll just, flex will be my weak spot. I'll just throw somebody in there. But if you draft under the assumption that you want elite options through your flex, and then we just talked about the guys you can find off waivers to put in your RB2 spot, you can find your way and patch together an RB2 spot off waivers where by mid-season, end of season, you have a super team because you found this year's Kyron off of waivers, and you already have wide receiver firepower through the flex spot, giving you the best possible starting lineup. Now, this is how you get wide receivers in your flex spot. While your league mates are finding their RB2s in the dead zone, you are drafting the values over on Sleeper, over on ESPN. I found the rounds 4 through 6 wide receivers this year over on Sleeper, and I compared them to Underdog ADP, which Underdog is very wide receiver heavy. It's a great way to get ready for your home league drafts as well, where you can see a guy like Malik Neighbors is going in the 3rd round on Underdog. He'll be a 4th or 5th round pick in your redraft league. So you can go on there, pay $5, get a nice little draft in that has actual upside of winning money. People have real money on the line, so no one's auto-drafting. And then you're ready to go for your home league, and you find all of these values where you're like, wow, Cooper Kupp is a 2nd round or a 3rd round pick on Underdog. I just got him in the 4th round in my home league. That's a huge value. So it kind of sets you up to know, man, these wide receivers shouldn't be this cheap. So if you're new to Underdog Fantasy, make sure you check it out. Use promo code RON. They will match your first deposit up to $250. But you can see across the board, all of these guys are massive values. Tank Dell, he goes in the 50s on Sleeper. You can draft him in the 3rd round on Underdog. So you can get all of that wide receiver value late, which also opens you up to take those running backs early. Now, I think some of you guys might say, well, Ron, I play in a half PPR, 1 flex league. Does this really apply? And I would say it does. When we look at the wins above replacement in a league with half PPR and 1 flex, we still have a lot of wide receivers at the top here. And I use this format because it was the 2nd highest filled out on the poll of like the most popular format. And you can see there's still a bunch of wide receivers on this list. You still have Tyreek, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all over the RB2 from last year. McCaffrey still at the top. It does push up guys like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, the onesies, tight end, quarterback is a onesie. Those guys get pushed up as the starting lineup shrinks. But wide receivers are still very much valuable. And when we plug in the optimal lineup over on Destination Devy, you can see still it wants wide receivers in the flex spot 75% of the time, 1 flex among 12 teams. That would be 12 flex spots, 9 wide receivers at the optimal amount. There should still be a wide receiver in your flex spot in a perfect world. Now, you will see 2 plus 9 doesn't equal 12. What's going on there? It's the average. So I imagine what's happening here is it's like 2.33, 9.33, 0.34. It's rounding all of them down. So just take that with a grain of salt. Now, how do we really make sure we get enough wide receivers to not only fill our wide receiver spots, but then have the good wide receivers in our flex spots? And this is a rule of thumb that I would have still in home leagues because you're going to find a lot of values. You're going to have guys like Rome Odunze and Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas. And I don't know, there's going to be a lot of wide receiver value in your drafts all the way through round 10. So what I like to say is I want to make sure that I'm filling through my wide receiver spot, through the flex with wide receivers, plus 1 or 2 by round 10. And the idea is here that you draft 1 or 2 extra wide receivers on top of going through your flex so that you can have fill-ins for bye weeks, for injuries, just to make sure you are all set and good to go. So I have this little graphic here. If you are in a league with 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, you want to have 4 to 5 wide receivers through round 10, right? So that's 2 wide receivers, a flex, and then either another or 2 extra on top of that. 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, you want 5 to 6. 3 wide receiver, 1 flex, you want 5 to 6. 3 wide receiver, 2 flex, you want 6 to 7. So it's pretty easy. You want wide receivers through the flex plus 1 or 2 by round 10. And what that gives us is 3 core strategies to be drafting with in 2024. You want to make sure that you're targeting running backs with legendary upside in the first 3 rounds. I would aim for max 2 running backs through the first 6 rounds. You want to avoid the RB dead zone in rounds 4 through 6. And then you want to win the flex by drafting wide receivers through your flex spot plus 1 or 2 by round 10. Now, moving on from that, I did want to touch on quarterback and tight end draft strategy. I will say the biggest thing to note when it comes to quarterback and tight ends is your league settings. That's honestly an overall huge point. Know your league, know your settings, know your scoring, know your league mates and their tendencies so that you know where you can attack the spots in your draft. So when we talk about like an 8-person league, there's going to be an increased scarcity on the elite quarterbacks and tight ends, where in an 8-person league, there's going to be good running backs and good wide receivers to be had later on. There's going to be a surplus of them. But because there's only about, 5 elite tight ends, 5 elite quarterbacks, you want to make sure that you're prioritizing those guys because there is some scarcity there where it's a massive disadvantage to have that next tier of quarterbacks or tight ends. And I'll say the same thing in those shallower lineups, right? We talked about it earlier, where the shallower your lineup gets, right? If it's 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, the shallower your lineup and the smaller your lineup is, the higher of the percentage of your starting lineup is going to quarterbacks and tight ends, right? So if they are making up 35% of your starting lineup versus like 15%, that is a big, big difference. The bigger percentage that they're taking up of your starting lineup, the more you want to prioritize them. Now, I will say, when we talk about them just broadly speaking, we do want to make sure that we are prioritizing. You can go for elite tight ends, elite quarterbacks. I honestly think that anything is viable here because when we look at the wins above replacement from our 2 flex leagues in full PPR, even in a deeper lineup setting like that, we still have Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, Travis Kelce all in our top 20. We still have Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts also in our top 20. That's making up 25% of our top 20 wins above replacement. Now, both of these quarterbacks were taken early. I think that in terms of onesies in general, the earliest I would take a quarterback or a tight end would be at the 2-3 turn. Like late second is probably the absolute earliest I would go, but it is also worth mentioning. Kelsey and Hawkinson were taken earlier, but Sam Laporta was taken late as like a guy you could get in like the 12th round last year. Same thing with tight end. I will say those two guys up top, Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, give you an edge that can't really be replicated, right? Josh Allen was more valuable last year than Travis Etienne, who was like the RB2 in terms of wins above replacement, but you can also get late round quarterbacks where CJ Stroud was good last year, Joe Flacco off of waivers, Jordan Love. So there's, I don't know, I don't have a great saying for it of like there's many ways to skin a cat, but there's many ways to get by at quarterback and tight end. I will say though, this is kind of how I see the tiers breaking down, where you have Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts as your elite quarterbacks up top, and then that next tier would be Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, then Stroud and Anthony Richardson, and then Burrow, Kyler, Dak, and Love, and then after that, you just want to stream the position and just say, screw it, I'll take my Herbert late, I'll take my Caleb Williams, and go from there. Similar idea at tight end, where this is kind of how I see the tiers breaking up. It's very weird where you have like 5 elite options this year in Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Andrews, and Kincaid. Then you have Pitts and Kittle. Then you have Ingram, Bowers, and Njoku, Ferguson. And what I would say, like, if I am using those last 4 tight ends, I probably am drafting a second tight end just as a secondary option on my bench. Now, I will say it's tough to really break down tight ends and quarterbacks in terms of tiers because you have to look at them compared to the other positions. So I do want to say I have my top 200 rankings over on patreon.com/Ron Stewart right now. You can find my top 200 there. I have an entire cheat sheet that you can check off player by player as you're drafting. It's all tiered. It says what round I'm targeting each player in. And to me, if I could only bring one cheat sheet into a draft, one thing with me into a home league draft, a high stakes draft, it would be my cheat sheet over on patreon.com/Ron Stewart. You can find a link to that in the description or the comment section down below. Now, our last thing we're going to touch on, I usually don't cover kicker and defensive strategy, but when it comes to kicker and defense, I am punting it. I want my last 2 roster spots, instead of being kicker and defense, my last 2 roster spots I want as lottery tickets. Think about Zach Moss last year, right? We had the weird reports on Jonathan Taylor. Most of us knew, well, if things go south, a guy like Zach Moss could be a league winner. So you take him and you put him on your bench. Before that, we've had like the Le'Veon Bell holdout with James Conner. You want to have lottery tickets like that on your bench over a kicker. You're not getting a tons of wins above replacement with guys like Justin Tucker or insert a really good defense. You can just stream it week by week. And I do want to give a big shout out. I started making fantasy football content on Reddit. It was a brutal time, but somebody that came up at a similar time as me was Subvertidown, and I've used him ever since. So like since 2019, I've been using Subvertidown. He has a website. It's not live for 2024 just yet because we're so far out, but he does week by week projections of kickers, defense, and quarterbacks. So like all of your streaming needs can be found there. I'll put a link either in the description or the comment section down below. To me, he is the best resource for streaming. Now, with that being said, let's do a mock draft. So that brings us here. We're going to do a mock draft with the settings we've been using for this entire video. PPR, 12 teams, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and 2 flex spots. Now, I get this question all the time, and I want to make sure that I kind of speak on it. Ron, what is the best position to draft from in 2024? I would say from the 5 spot. I want one of McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Brees, or Bijan. Those are my 5 guys. And then I also think that the second round is as flat as it's ever been. Once you get to the 201, there aren't many better options, right? You're drafting like, I don't know, I guess like Jonathan Taylor, Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake London. And I would argue at the back half of the second round, guys like Kyron Williams and Nico Collins aren't much worse options, Devon Achane as well, than the guys in the early second. So you get the benefit of getting an elite stud here in the top 5 picks, and then also the second round is super weak. So let's start the draft. We'll see what the CPU does. It's not going to be perfect, but I think it'll be a decent outline of what I'm trying to do. And this is kind of perfect. Someone takes Jefferson early, and we get to take Brees Hall, who to me really personifies the idea of taking a legendary upside swing on a running back early. Now we'll see what makes it back to us. Like I said, the second round isn't super, super pretty this year. There's really a lack of consensus as well. I do like guys like Devon Achane, but Achane might be around in the 3rd round. We already took a running back. We're probably going to go with a wide receiver here. I feel like this is kind of rare for London to make it back. I guess in home leagues he'll make it back here more often than not, but we're going to take... I'm thinking about it. We'll take Drake London here, and we'll see what makes it back to us on the other side. I would imagine Achane goes, but if he doesn't, we'll give him a strong look. He does go. Kyron's gone. So now I'm pretty much done with these running backs. I don't think really any of them have the upside we're looking for this early. But it's not all that pretty. Ayuk is already gone. Kelsey and Laporta are gone. So let's take probably... Oh, man, you could talk me into Jalen Hurts here if you really wanted to, just to get an elite quarterback here. Let's think for a second here. Because I do think, like, Debo is a really strong option in the 3rd round. Man, I think so is Jalen Hurts, but I'll probably pass on Hurts for now, and we will probably go... I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anybody. We'll probably go Debo. Debo's somebody who I would take as early as, like, maybe, like, the 212, so I'm fine with him in the 3rd. And we're just making sure, right, so we have to sort of be cognizant of we want to fill the wide receivers through the flex plus another 1 or 2. We have our legendary running back. We'll worry about RB2 later unless if we get a screaming value to come back to us. Hurts is gone. Lamar is still hanging around in the 4th. That's very interesting. Mark Andrews is still hanging around in the 4th. So we could take a detour for a onesie here. I have 4 wide receivers that I really like. Metcalf, Devontae Smith, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell. Not going to take any of those running backs. Man, you could really talk me into Lamar Jackson here. Let's actually go Andrews and see what comes back to us. I think I would prefer Andrews over Lamar, just to have that elite onesie. To me, like, if we have to go all the way down to, like, Kyler or Caleb or something, then that's not a big deal. But let's go Andrews. Why not? We get an elite tight end there. Lamar Jackson goes right after him. I would love for one of these receivers to make it back. All right, that's what I was hoping for. Okay, so Metcalf in the 5th round is just insane. And I guess that's the kind of stuff that you're going to see in home leagues. And that's why I felt comfortable taking that detour away from wide receiver for Mark Andrews. Now, we're going to see what quarterbacks makes it back to us here. You could talk me into Kyler Murray. Wide receivers are looking a little bit dry here. Let's take Kyler. Now, you might say, well, Ron, like, you're really straying away from wide receiver here. I mean, we took a receiver in round 2, 3, round 5. I will say as well, earlier in this video, we kind of said avoiding the dead zone. Avoiding the dead zone rounds 4 through 6 doesn't necessarily mean hammering 3 straight wide receivers. It just means taking positions that aren't running back. So 6th round Kyler Murray, I'm kind of fine with. I expect one of these 2 teams here to take Kyler, so I'm just going to take him before that can happen, and then we'll just see what wide receiver makes it back to us, because I have a very broad range of receivers still available here that I am eyeing up. Let's see. Now, I will say as well, this is a 15-round draft, so there's like 7 bench positions, no kicker or defense just because I didn't think it was really needed. And then what do we got? Wow, Rashee Rice in round 7. I think I'm fine taking Rashee Rice because I know that we're going to be all right when it comes to Rashee, getting wide receiver fill-ins for Rashee Rice. But we do have some good running backs available too. Let's think for a second here. We have a lot of wide receivers. I mean, I'm eyeing up Najee hard, but I would also be fine with like Javonte, Warren later on, Tyjae Spears, Brian Robinson. Yeah, let's go Rashee. I mean, 7th round Rashee Rice feels kind of ridiculous. So we'll go Rashee, and we'll see what comes back to us. We're filled through the flex. We have rounds 8, 9, 10. Probably 2 of those are going to be running backs. We're probably going to aim, because we took 2 running backs or 2 wide receivers in the first 3 rounds, we can probably afford to just have 1 wide receiver additional through the flex. Let's see. So we have Warren available. We have Spears, Brian Robinson. What do wide receivers look like? Pretty much in terms of guys I'm fine taking here. We just did get the DeAndre Hopkins injury. I would say like Brian Thomas, Keon Coleman, JSN. I mean, we had the... All right, so I'm actually going to take a receiver here. Because I do... Or actually, no. We're just going to bet... We're going to bet that Watson makes it back to us. And we'll take Jaylen Warren here. We'll take Jaylen Warren as a nice little upside swing at RB2. We'll see what he can do for us. We're praying that Watson makes it back. If he doesn't, I think Christian Watson does not make it back. So let's actually do Man, I'm trying to think if we should sort of bet that that Geno Smith is going to be all right. I'm actually going to pass on that. We'll go Keon Coleman. That does put our flex a little bit, like, not as strong as I would like it with Rashee Rice and Keon Coleman, but this is also a team with Kyler, Mark Andrews, like, all very well-rounded. We're going to take a running back here in round 10. We'll see what comes back. I do like Chase Brown a ton. Let's do it. We're going to have to hammer RB2 types here. Actually, man, I like Chase Brown, but Zeke Elliott would be a kind of, like, really nice, just somebody that can get you points every week in the RB2 spot. Now, let's take the upside swing on Chase Brown. I'm fine with that. We're going to just kind of stream together RB2s. And then this is where wide receiver starts to dry up. We'll probably wait to take another receiver. Zeke Elliott does go. We have Jerome Ford, who I guess could kind of give us points early with Nick Chubb gone. I kind of like that. Let's do that. We'll buy ourselves some time to churn and burn running backs on waivers. And we'll have like the options of Jerome Ford and Jalen Warren early on. And Rashee Rice is someone that probably plays week 1 at this point in time. So very much fine with how that looks. Also, if I take a guy like Kyler and Mark Andrews, like 2 elite quarterbacks and tight ends, I'm completely fine just rolling with those guys. Like these last 3 picks or last 4 picks are all going to be running backs and wide receivers. Let's see. In terms of the wide receivers I'm looking for here, Dontavion Wicks. I mean, I guess this is what you're going to see in your home leagues. So, yeah, I was really hoping for somebody like Leggett, but he's going much earlier these days. Judy's a good shout, too. So let's actually go with Dontavion Wicks, someone who's been, like, one of my favorite sleepers to draft this year. At running back, nothing all that crazy. I do think you're going to find some crazy values late in these drafts. Like Khalil Herbert, 185 is crazy. Bucky Irving, 182 is crazy. We could probably take one more wide receiver. I think that we'll probably take Jalen Polk. He's somebody that we're going to do a sleeper video, I believe, on Monday or Sunday, actually. So let's do Jalen Polk here. And then we will take 2 running backs to finish this off. Again, Ray Davis is a great option. Tyler Algier is a great option. Oops, okay, he's gone. Kamani Vidal is pretty damn good. Elijah Mitchell is just a direct backup then, so Ray Davis goes. I don't want a pure handcuff in Elijah Mitchell, though. I'd rather have some upside. So let's take Bucky Irving, and then we'll probably take one more upside swing running back here. Probably Khalil Herbert or Estime would be my 2 options here. You're going to have a lot of really fun late-round running back options. And Khalil Herbert doesn't go. Okay, perfect. There is the squad. Breece Hall in the RB1 spot. Jalen Warren in the RB2 spot. We're churning and burning running backs where we have like Chase Brown and Jerome Ford that can give you something off of, the bench for the RB2 spot. We have London, Debo, Metcalf, and Rashee Rice through the flex. Upside swings on Keon Coleman, Dontavion Wicks, Jalen Polk. And then we have really good quarterback and tight end with Mark Andrews and Kyler Murray. To me, like in a perfect world, if I'm going into a home league, this is a very well-balanced team. It's set up for maximum upside if I can hit on next year's Achane, Kyron Williams, Zeke Elliott off of waivers to be that league winner down the stretch. And then we're strong pretty much everywhere, have good wide receiver depth through the flex. Pretty much A+ in terms of what I would like my team to look like for a home league draft this season. Now, that is going to do it for us today. As you guys know, this is my month. It's August. We're going to be streaming. I think our first official stream will be August 4th, and then we're going to just be streaming every day through kickoff. So be on the lookout for that. These are some of my favorite videos to make, these strategy videos. Let me know how you guys enjoyed the wins above replacement stuff. To me, it's much better than playoff advancement rate, and I had a fun time looking at this new environment of running backs getting priced down, even in your home league. So, as always, if you enjoyed, make sure you get down below, subscribe, leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, oh.